right. Well, howdy.
Howdy.
I'm really excited to be here. I did a lot of sessions for Wellness Works in the fall, and this is going to be a little bit of a different series, talking a little bit more about cooking and how to apply some of those concepts. So a little bit of background on myself, and then we'll dive right into it because you don't really need to know a whole lot about me. You want more of the information. As Courtney mentioned, I am an employee at Butyl Health Center, so I'm a registered dietitian. Did my undergrad here at Texas A&M, and then went on to do my master's and internship at the School of Public Health through UT in Houston. So I did a lot of my rotations in the Med Center, and I've been here at Butyl. It will be 8 years in the fall. So I see students every single day for any type of nutrition need. I see a lot of eating issues, weight management, diabetes, really the whole gamut of nutrition. If it has to deal with food, I'm happy to help with that. So that's primarily what I do, but I really enjoy reaching out to community members, reaching out to faculty, staff, although we can't see faculty and staff in the Butyl Health Center unless they're currently taking classes on campus. I love doing that and reaching out, whether it's through grocery store tours or cooking classes and whatnot. So this is going to be a combination of those outreach events for each of you here. Today's theme is more meal planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you put a meal together, where to start for some of you who may just really not even know where to start with cooking. For those of you who feel like you're a pretty good cook and do a great job but need more ideas, that's going to be in here too. You don't have to frantically write a lot down. I'm going to send all of these slides to the Wellness Works team, and they will send those to you. There's several hyperlinks in this presentation for recipes, meal planning, handouts on how to create a grocery list. So that will be available for you as well. So just know that. At any point, stop and ask me questions. This is pretty informal. I want it to be interactive as well. So if you have questions about just nutrition or something that I've said or something that's confusing, or you just want to make a comment, please feel free to do that. Okay? So let's get started here a little bit. When we think about meal planning, I have a lot of patients that I see that are like, I really want to meal prep and meal plan, but I don't have the time. And I don't really know where to start. I find these great resources online, but it's really overwhelming. Or we do it for a week and then it's really tedious and time consuming, and I don't want to keep doing that. So the first thing that we need to think about here is, this is going to be a start to finish meal, but what works best for you? And nutrition, a lot of times people will ask me, students and non-students, what has to be healthy? And I don't like to eat healthy. And I just really, that gets boring over and over. I can't eat chicken, rice, and vegetables every day. And I'm right there with you. I don't want to eat that either. So we have to find what works good for you. What are some of your preferences, and how can we merge that to a healthy meal? So when we look at this, you want to decide how many nights are you going to cook. Do you have time to cook every single night? Or are you like me and it's maybe one night a week and it's leftovers the rest of the week, or a midweek type meal? What's our preparation method? How much time do you really have? We're going to go through some crock pot meals, some overnight meals, some quick and easy put together from your fridge type meals. So what does that look like? What are the components of your meal? So what are your taste preferences? What is your family's taste preferences? And I think that's even more important. For me, I have 2 boys at home, and I think, okay, well, I'm not cooking 2 separate things, one for me and one for them. We're going to eat the same thing. But it's what can I meet with their taste preferences and still be somewhat healthy, but also what I like as well. And then we're going to look at recipes, and believe me, by the end of the presentation, you'll have several recipes that you can take with you to use. But the basis of a meal, so when anyone comes in my office and they're like, well, what does a healthy meal look like? And I start telling them, you know, eating out doesn't have to be unhealthy, or cooking at home doesn't have to be hard. When we really sit down and look at it, our plate should look like this. And the big recommendation here is half the plate should be fruits and vegetables. That's number one. So if we look at that and we say, all right, where can I get those from? It can be frozen, it can be fresh, it can be canned. You're going to see several ideas in here as well. But those are simple things that even if we don't have the time, we can put a steamed bag of carrots in the microwave for 5 minutes and add it to the pizza that we took out. So it can be that simple if we can include half of our plate fruits and vegetables. Now, another thing I'll get here is, well, it's expensive and I throw it away. I have good intentions, I buy it, but by the end of the week, I haven't used it. So those are maybe some tips of buying frozen or canned that are perfectly fine to do. Your frozen is just as healthy as your fresh. And in fact, it's a lot of times cheaper, especially when things are not in season. So that's a great idea to do. When we look at our fruit too, so our canned fruit or fruit in its own juice is perfectly fine. The little fruit cups you can send to school or take with you, those are all excellent. So it doesn't have to be buying all fresh and hoping that you get a chance to cut it up, because it may not happen, okay? A fourth of it should be proteins. You're gonna see that here shortly that we'll talk about. And then a fourth of it should be grains. We're gonna do I'll do a presentation at the very end of this summer series on fad diets. And we'll talk through ketogenic, paleo, some of these trends that we're seeing cutting out carbohydrates. But I'll tell you, when we cut out carbs, we're a lot less satisfied, maybe not by the end of the day, or maybe not by the end of the next 2 days, but by the end of the week and weekend comes, we're eating everything sweet, sugary, carb-rich that we can get our hands on because we're starving for them. So including them in our diet is really important to do. We just want to make half of our grains whole grains. Okay, so what does that mean? That means brown rice. That means whole grain pasta. That means whole wheat tortillas, whole grain breads. Those are the kind of things that we can incorporate. So you may be thinking here, well, my kids won't eat brown rice, or they're not going to touch a whole grain slice of bread. So for you, it may be just merging the two together. It may be taking white rice and brown rice, making a bag of each, and then mixing them together. Same with pasta, same with our breads. And it may just be slowly introducing those changes to make a healthy plate. But grains are really important to incorporate for a sense of fullness, for a sense of fiber, and also for that sense of glucose and carbohydrate level that our brain needs to thrive on. So don't discount those, and you'll see those come about here. Okay? A really good starting point, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask, is jasmine rice being healthy for you a total rumor, or is it true?
So jasmine rice is similar to white rice, right? It's kind of a white type grain. It doesn't have as much fiber as your whole grain brown rice will. If you ever compare labels, just look at the fiber content and you're going to see a slight difference in that. Now, certainly if it's a taste preference, go for it. And maybe your whole grains are found in other forms. Maybe it's whole wheat pasta, or maybe it's a whole wheat slice of bread. So sometimes here again, we can't compromise taste every time. If you love it, go for it, but it's going to be less fiber and a little less protein than our brown rice will be.
So we should focus more on the fiber and protein content, not so much the caloric difference.
Absolutely,
Jasmine
yes.
rice has less calories, but I guess it's lacking in other areas as well.
Right, exactly, and that's a great point. So even when we're looking at meal planning in particular, we can find a really low calorie option or low calorie plan, but I always say judge the food by the company it keeps. So what's in that food? We can have a 100 calorie snack pack of crackers that's 100 calories, or we can have a 100 calorie apple that has fiber, a little bit of potassium, vitamins, minerals, that type of thing. So look a little bit more at what nutrients it has. So that's a great point. Protein has calories, right? So if white rice only has 1 gram of protein and brown rice has 2, well, brown rice is going to have a little bit more calories. The calorie difference, though, is from the protein, and that's what the benefit is. Another good example would be almond milk and cow's milk. So almond milk shows what 60 calories a serving. Great, it has calcium, but it has no protein. So that's why it's low calorie. Your cow's milk has 8 grams of protein, so we're getting a calorie difference from protein, not calories from fat or calories from carbohydrate. So excellent point. Yes, ma'am.
What about those exotic items like quinoa, farro? What else have I heard of?
Yeah. So
when do you use those, or how do you cook those? I mean,
so
I know I'm cooking it right, quinoa.
Right. The question was, what about some of the exotic grains, farro, quinoa, those type of things? Those are all great grains. Quinoa is a whole grain, so it's naturally a whole grain. It's going to have fiber. It also is a complete protein, meaning it has all the essential amino acids similar to a steak or fish or meat would have. So great grains to be incorporating. They are a little exotic. We cook them similar to how we would cook rice. So it's a very similar cooking method, but great to incorporate if you want to do that. So excellent questions there, and good points. For those of you who say, you know what, I'm really just starting out. I really don't even know where to begin with this, but help me out. This is a great resource. So if you Google or go to myplate.gov, this is a great way to help you just kind of start outlining, what does this look like for me? I pulled an example here of a basic 2,000 calorie a day diet. I'll tell you, as a dietitian, that's a very abstract number to be pulling from. I have some patients who eat 1,300 calories. I have some who need 3,000 calories. This is an average. This isn't everyone's particular plan, but I pulled it because we see that over and over based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Most people need around 2,000 calories, but some certainly need less and some certainly need more. But this gives you an idea of what we're looking at and striving for on a daily basis. What would that look like? So it's 2 cups of fruit, 2.5 cups of vegetables, 6 ounces of grains, 5.5 ounces of meat. If we think about ounces, because that's a little bit hard to communicate here, 3 ounces is like a deck of cards. Okay, so that kind of gives you a perspective of what we're looking at here. And then 3 cups of our dairy, whether that's yogurt or milk here. Okay. That's just an average of what we want to try to achieve in a day. But as you can see, many of you may be doing great on the grains and protein, but we're lacking in other areas. Or you may be doing great on fruits and vegetables, but not getting enough protein in because you're not sure what to cook or it's expensive and you don't know how to incorporate that. So we're going to talk about each one of those. But this is just an excellent, for the beginners, basic starting point. Okay. Portions are also important. This slide is up here really to help show us what that looks like. Because yeah, we measure in cups and teaspoons and tablespoons, but if we look on packages, a lot of times it'll say grams or ounces, and that's really confusing. It's confusing even for someone who's done this for years, let alone a consumer who's trying to make sense of an ounce of grains and what that might be. So you can see what this is appropriate amount. Fruit serving, when I think of a fruit serving about the size of a baseball, you go to the supermarket now and you may be finding them the size of a softball or larger. So just being in mind what we're getting as opposed to portion versus serving. Portion is how much we're actually eating. The serving size is what's listed on the label of how much we should be consuming. Okay. Questions so far on just some of those basics of the plate and what that looks like? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about a how-to. So I talked at the very beginning, we want to really think about what is our lifestyle, what are we cooking for, who are we cooking for, and how do we want to make that work? So first of all, think about how much you want to cook and what works best for you. So if you have a busy night schedule, if you have a free week and you're cooking for yourself or you're cooking for you and one other person, it may be feasible to cook every night. So we're not looking at cooking large amounts or doing something maybe overnight. We're cooking as each day goes. But think about that and be realistic. That's one thing I try to tell patients a lot. And I think as just a society, we get into a here and now, I want it quick and fast and I want to lose weight or I want to be healthier tomorrow. And it's easy to do that because we're in just the generation that our smartphones are there. We look things up immediately. We immediately get a response from the internet and different things. And we expect that with our health too, whereas it's not that easy. So be realistic with yourself. If cooking 1 night a week is realistic, set that. If cooking 4 nights a week is realistic, then set that. But try not to compensate and try not to overwhelm yourself here, okay? Then we want to look at some different types of meals. So what's going to work best for you? Is it the crock pot, slow cooker, pressure cooker? Is that easy for you? Is it, I need something 30 minutes or less because I have screaming kids at home and they're not going to wait an hour for it to cook? That's me. Is it a freezer meal, something you can just get out and heat during the week? What is it for you? And I'm going to give you examples of each of these here. Okay. All of these little links here, as I mentioned, are going to be links to websites with recipes on them. I'm also going to give you a page here shortly that's going to have websites with good recipes on it. So the internet is saturated with a lot of information, good and bad. Sometimes it's really beneficial, and then other times we go to it and I'm like, oh, this is probably not the best source of information. So these are all going to be links to these recipes here, but more ideas of what you could follow. So the slow cooker, you could start it in the morning while you're at work and then come home and it's ready. It could be more of a weekend type thing. I think about this a lot during the summer as well. It's hot. You don't want to be in the kitchen. You're maybe outside with kids or with family members. So these are great. So all of these are excellent recipe ideas that's going to incorporate that plate, but also be healthy for us to do some slow cooker ideas. 30-minute meal. So this may be, okay, you have some time at home, you don't have any activities this evening, but you really don't have time to spend all day in the kitchen. and you want something simple and easy. And these are great ideas for this. One thing that I would suggest, and I'm just thinking through even like our meal tonight versus what I did yesterday, it calls for little pieces of broccoli. It's like, I think the recipe is chicken, macaroni, cheese, and broccoli. I have a little 2-year-old at home who would die for macaroni any day. So when I think about this, my idea last night was to chop up the broccoli so it's ready to go. So that's just one small step that we can do. It took me 2 minutes. It was during mealtime. I was done. I was cleaning things up, but it wasn't the whole preparation of it. So think ahead, or you can even buy them cut up already. You're going to spend a little bit more money, but for some people that's worth it. So think about some of those things that's already chopped, already prepared, and not adding any more steps to it there. So all great ideas here again. Freezer meals are really great as well. So maybe you live alone. Maybe it's just you and a spouse. Maybe it's just you taking care of parents, or you just don't cook a whole lot. So it may be, I don't want to cook much at all, but I love this recipe of chicken spaghetti, and I'm going to make it and make the whole recipe instead of cutting it in half and freezing that other half to go. So don't discount those types of things that you can freeze and then reheating later on, 2 weeks later or a month later. As we're on freezer meals too, another thing that I tell my students a lot is their complaint to me is time. So when I get home, I don't have time to cook a whole lot, but I still want to cook. And my recommendation here would be take the time to cook in bulk those things that take the longest. So for example, meat in particular usually takes the longest. We can steam vegetables, we can throw macaroni in a pot, we can steam rice in the microwave even nowadays. But the meat is it's like, I don't really have time to cook all that. So when you are cooking it, cook 5 chicken breasts and then freeze the other 4 for later on. Cook the whole package of ground beef and freeze the one later on, and it's already cooked. Now we just get it out and it's ready for pasta or tacos or something like that. So cook your meat all at once and then freeze that if you're not into the freezer meals or want to do that. But these are all great ideas that you can use for that freezer type meal.
Question.
Yes.
In regards to deep freezing the food that you made a month ago, what's the best way to do that? Would you say put it in the oven, microwave it? Like, does it depend on the item, or
to reheat it?
Yes.
You know, it really depends on the item. I would say what I have found to be most effective for the freezer type meals are those casserole type things. I wouldn't do things that get watery, that I think of fish, for example. So cooking, freezing, reheating. If it's in a casserole, you're probably not going to notice it. But if it's more in just it's single serve, the taste is going to be a little different. So reheating it in a way in the oven would probably be the best way. If you're adding, I think of meat, like I mentioned. So the ground beef, I cooked it. I didn't add anything to it and froze it. Okay, when I get it out, then I add the things to it so it tastes fresh without that, oh, it's been sitting in the freezer for a month type feeling. So that's usually the best way to do it. Even things too, as I'm trying to think of other things that I've done personally and my students have done, if it's a piece of chicken or chicken tenders from a restaurant. Okay, so you went there, you didn't eat all of them. They're fried. You know, it's something that when you reheat in the microwave, it's not real good. If you put it in the oven, it's going to crisp up a lot better than if you just put it in the microwave. Another tip that a lot of students of mine have used, and I haven't personally used, but they say if you reheat things in a skillet, like pizza, for example, reheat it in a skillet and it still gets warm, it still maintains a little bit of that crispness as opposed to the microwave. So skillet or oven are probably the better ways to reheat things to still have the same texture. Yeah, good question. Okay, so make ahead meals here too. So if we're trying to think ahead or in preparation in advance, these are usually where when we think of meal planning, a lot of my students' minds go to is I have to have a week's worth of meals sitting in my fridge ready to go. And it doesn't have to be that, but this is another technique that's really easy for people. On Sunday, they're going to spend 2 hours to do this. And these are great ideas here. So this is usually prepared like on a weekend when we have a larger amount of time, 2 hours, 3 hours to really sit down and do that. So we would make different options for breakfast, lunch. You're going to see a whole meal plan here in a second that's going to break down every single day of the week with meals for you. You can interspace leftovers for lunch. I like this because it gives you different options, but it also allows for you to add those fruits and vegetables into maybe a dish that you made and you're going to have every day this week, but we can change it up through the fruits and vegetable option. So we're not feeling like we have to make multiple things. This is really great for more just students, single couples, not with a large family, because it allows for, I can mix and match things, but we're not cooking for hours every single night. Okay, when we're picking recipes, so as step 2, we think about, first of all, what does our time look like? What does our budget look like? What do our resources look like? And you've had some ideas there. Secondly, we want to try to figure out what recipes we're going to pick. And this is usually the biggest challenge I get from a lot of my patients is, where do I go to get recipes? And how do I know they're going to be good? And I don't want to spend a lot on these ingredients to have it fail from a great Pinterest picture, but it didn't turn out good at all. And I've been right there too. I have this great idea of cooking this recipe that I found, and then we cook it and it's like, this is terrible. So it's how do we know where to go? And I'm going to give you some resources here, but also what's going to be reasonable for you. So if there's a spice in this recipe that's just completely out of line for you, or you're like, I don't have that, and I don't want to buy it for one recipe to try, then maybe we try something else, or we use some substitutes, and I'll show you that here shortly. Think about dietary restrictions, our healthfulness. What flavor do you like? Do you have the ingredients? Are you having to go buy the equipment? Those are things that we really want to consider when we think about picking a recipe. So credible recipes or links to sites here that I'm going to include, and you'll have all these in your presentation and your slides. These are all very credible, very resourceful information, but good, healthy recipes as well. So if you're looking for something that you don't want to scour the internet for hours, these are where I would go to do that. Okay. I mentioned substitutes too. So a lot of my patients will find a great recipe on Pinterest or any of these sites and go, yeah, that's great, but how do I make this better? Or this is my mom's recipe and it's really good, but I know it's not good for me and I'm trying to manage my weight, or I'm trying to gain weight, or I'm trying to put on lean muscle, and what do I need to do with that? So this is just a small list of substitutions that we could use that have been tried and true, that a lot of times I find I'm recommending to my patients just for small, easy swaps. So for example, the first one here, using a skim or 2%, 1% milk instead of whole milk, is usually you're going to get about the same consistency, about the same type taste, and you're going to get a lot less calories and a lot less fat for that. Now, some recipes you were like, no, I want to keep my whole milk. That's okay. We'll talk a little bit later in some of the lecture series on whole milk and some of the benefits that we're seeing in that. But if you're looking at a fat content, if you're looking at heart disease risk and you have some of those factors, we may want to consider that. My number one favorite thing to use is the plain Greek yogurt as a substitute for sour cream. Have any of you ever used that? Mm-hmm. Okay, what are your thoughts on it?
I had to lie to my husband. I had to put it in a sour cream container for him to not know that it was good.
And did he say anything?
No, he didn't.
Exactly. What, anyone else have good or bad experience? Like it, yeah. And so I use it regularly. I have a husband at home too who's kind of like, oh, we're not going to put this on the potato, are we? I'm like, yeah, just try it. And that's all we buy now. We never buy sour cream because of that. It has way more protein. It has the same consistency, same thickness, and it also gives the same flavor and appeal. So that's a very good, you would use that 1-to-1. So if it calls for a cup of sour cream, we would do a cup of plain Greek yogurt. I will say for this one with substitutes, I mentioned just the taste and texture of foods. We still want it to taste good. So with the plain Greek yogurt, if you're just using it for like a topping on a baked potato, if you're using it in a dip for ranch dip instead of the sour cream, all great to use the low-fat, non-fat version. I would say if you're using it more in like a soup, or you're using it as something that's cooking a long period of time, the lower fat version can get kind of watery. It breaks down a little bit. So using a 2% or whole milk Greek yogurt does a little bit better in those type recipes. So just something to keep in mind there. Certainly we know that grilled foods are going to be a little bit better than our fried foods. I threw in the rolled oats instead of breadcrumbs. Remember we talked about rolled oats, or oats in particular are a whole grain. So we chop those up finely or put them in a food processor. Taste very similar as opposed to the breadcrumbs in the store that are going to be mainly from white bread. They're not going to be a whole wheat breadcrumb. So something else to consider there. If we're looking at cutting down on the calories, we could do half applesauce, half oil, half applesauce, half butter. Certainly in these recipes, I would say that would be more for baking. I wouldn't necessarily do that in frying. I wouldn't do that in sauteing. I would do it more in muffins, breads, things that have a little bit of a denser texture would be appropriate there. The all-purpose flour, you could use half whole wheat, half all-purpose flour. Here again, our mentality is, well, I want to do better and I want to go all out and use only whole wheat flour, and that's great, but it doesn't have the same texture. It's a little bit denser, and so your flavor and the outcome of your product may not be as good. So why not go with half to where you still get some of that fiber benefit, but you also get still the benefit of the all-purpose flour to provide that. So that's another great substitute. And then certainly watching your sodium content on your soup sauces. So buying no salt added vegetables, no salt added soups, and those types of things would be appropriate to use here. So all very simple substitutes that we can use that aren't anything crazy, aren't anything overly expensive. In fact, I think our Greek yogurt is often cheaper than the sour cream would be. So some cost savings there. Other questions on the substitutes? Has anyone else ever used something else for a substitute? No? Okay.
Coconut oil.
Coconut oil instead of?
Like whenever you're sauteing, instead of using, butter and stuff like that, because it gives it kind of like a sweet taste, but it also has the same, like it keeps, everything sticking to the pan and stuff like that. So I substitute coconut oil a lot of times.
Or ghee.
Yeah.
I like to use ghee a lot.
Ghee, okay, ghee instead of the butter.
Sometimes I'll do ground nuts instead of breadcrumbs.
Yes, so she mentioned ground nuts instead of breadcrumbs, and that's excellent as well, getting a little bit more protein in there, especially for someone who may not eat a lot of meat or protein sources. That's an excellent, more economical way to do that. So excellent. We can even use that instead of some of the flours. So if we ground the nuts for a different texture for the flour would be great. Yes?
So earlier you talked about spices or trying a different spice in a different recipe and not wanting to buy like the whole thing of that. I don't know, I'm sure other grocery stores do this, but I've noticed at H-E-B, they have the healthy living section, and they actually have spices over there. So you can get a small serving of that just to try it in your recipe, just so you like it before you buy it in bulk or the larger size of it. And it's very inexpensive and a good way to try different spices.
Yeah, and just for the Zoom participants, Courtney mentioned when you go to H-E-B, the spices in the bulk section that you can buy a tablespoon or a teaspoon is perfect for that. And I recommend that a lot on some budget-friendly type tips. So that's excellent to keep in mind. Another one that comes to mind there is if you even like taco seasoning in a pouch. So you could even make your own of that with chili powder and cumin and play with that yourself if you had the spices at home and needed to get rid of them. So certainly we look at convenience and cost, but also what works best for you. And those are great tips there. Yes.
So I have two Zoom participants. They shared that they replaced almond milk instead of regular milk, and then powdered PB2 in smoothies instead of peanut butter.
Okay. Yeah. So almond milk instead of cow's milk, like I mentioned there, calories would be a little different, but our protein would be lacking. So we just want to be aware and be a mindful consumer. And then the PB2, which is like a dehydrated peanut butter powder instead of peanut butter. We could see different benefits of that as well. When we look at peanut butter, there's healthy fats in there though too. So don't be afraid of it. Yeah, I think you brought up a great point. When we look at calories, we see that calories in regular peanut butter is maybe 150 calories for 2 tablespoons. And then we look at PB2 powder and it's way less. I'm like, well, that's what I want. But know what we're getting out of that. We're getting a lot of healthy fats and good nutrients from the peanut butter, and fats have calories. So just being a good consumer there, PB2 is the way to go with the smoothie because you already have fat in your smoothie and it's already enough calories, great. But know that the peanut butter isn't necessarily terrible if it's in the right form. Was there another question? Yes.
I was just going to mention on the spices part,
one thing that I've noticed as a mom with 2 kids in daycare is budget is a big thing with meal planning for me. I've noticed that buying the bulk spices is 90% of the time cheaper than buying the HEB brand or the McCormick or whatever. So use your own containers and store your spices. It's cheaper.
Yep. So just mentioning the bulk spices being a lot cheaper than the actual spices in the jar in the store. Excellent. Yes, ma'am.
I substitute evaporated milk for heavy cream
Okay.
soups.
Mhm.
So I could even use the skim or the 2%
Yep.
evaporated milk. It has the same thickness, but it's not like heavy
Cream.
cream fat.
Yes. So using evaporated milk instead of heavy cream, even using half and half instead of heavy cream is another good substitute too. It's still heavy, but it's not as heavy as the whipping cream would be. So excellent point there. All good things that still lend a good flavor. And that's really what nutrition is about too. We have to want to eat it, but it doesn't have to taste like cardboard to do that. So good substitutes here. So if we're looking at special diets too, these are things we want to really look at the labels, be a good label reader as to what's in it and what we need to avoid or not avoid. And certainly there's some recipe links here as well if you're looking for special diet type eating patterns for family members, yourself, friends, whatnot. So then this third step is really to make a list. And this is another area that I get a lot of students and patients and even family members, they're just overwhelmed. And next week, we're gonna go do a virtual tour of the store. So you're gonna, if you come, you'll be able to see or join on, you're gonna see how do we shop healthfully. So we've talked about planning and what to look at. Then we're gonna take that to the store virtually. So we'll go through different slides here and talk about what to look for and purchase. So that's another layer of this, but the grocery store can be overwhelming. It can be like, well, what do I look for here? Or I know this is good, but there's 10 labels of the same thing, and which one is best? I think of yogurts in particular. The aisle is huge. There's tons of choices. And it's like, what does all this stuff mean? So we'll sort through some of that. There's going to be links here too as well that are going to give you some like meal planning sheets, grocery lists. So you can click on this and even print them off for yourself at your office desk or at home. So think about what you need. Think about if we can combine different recipes that share the same ingredients. So maybe it's that one spice that we didn't really want to buy, but it looked really good in the recipe, but I found 2 recipes that it will use. Maybe I don't need oatmeal, but I'm going to make some granola bars with oats, and then I'm going to pulse them up to make breadcrumbs because I don't buy breadcrumbs regularly. So we're trying to find some things that share those same ingredients, especially if you're on a budget or trying to be cautious with that. One thing I always do is try to organize my list by the way the store goes. It saves a lot of time. I know there's curbside now. I know there's a lot of resources. I'm just one of those that likes to still go and pick up what I need and get out of there. But this is a great way to save time and also save the impulse buys too when you're just kind of leisurely looking around. So organize your list and try to come up with what ideas that we need. Next, we want to write it down. So I'm not as particular on this. Some people really like to know what they're having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day of the week. And every night, I'm a little bit more, okay, this sounds good tonight. Oh, I really didn't want that tonight, so I'm not going to cook that tonight. But if we have a little bit more of a plan and we can flex with that, this helps. So writing things down, we can do just dinner. We can write all meals down. If you need that accountability, write them all down and then use that as a checklist. Hey, I did fine with breakfast today, or that was a great option for dinner. From this link here that you're going to see in your slides will be downloadable grocery list, specialty list, and menu planner. So you'll be able to have access to those too, which are helpful for a lot of people. Okay. Let's go through a brief list of some of these last minute dinners. So for some of you who are sitting here and you're like, yeah, that's great, Megan, but I'm more of a last minute person. It's whatever I have on hand. I'm usually one of those that goes through the drive-through and picks up things for home. Think about maybe what you have on hand and how we can make a combination of that into a meal from some of these simple ideas that you've learned. So some pantry staples too that I usually always keep in the pantry regardless of what week it is. If we're out of pasta, I'll always buy it again at the store just to have it there. Spaghetti sauce is always in there. Canned beans is always in there. These are easy things that we could simply make a meal out of if our time ran short and our meal plan didn't go as planned. If we didn't get that meat out of the freezer like we said we were, These are all great things that we can use. So keep some of these things on hand. And a lot of these are non-perishable, so they're not going to go bad in 2 weeks if we didn't use them that month. Other things that are great in the fridge: butter, cheese, eggs, tortillas. We can make a quesadilla out of anything. We can make a breakfast taco simply with eggs and tortillas. There's a lot that we can do with that. We can make a wrap for our kids' lunch instead of a sandwich. Those are all easy things that take little time and didn't take us any preparation work. Freezer staples: I always keep a lot of chicken tenderloins, chicken breast in the freezer, packages of beef if you choose to do that, frozen vegetables, frozen fruit. These are all excellent as well. So maybe we didn't get to go to the store as we thought this week, or our meal plan fell through, but we had a frozen bag of vegetables, like I said, that we could steam with the pizza we picked up on the way home. So we're still incorporating that plate, but we're also incorporating some fruit and vegetable because it was there and on hand. And a lot of why we eat what we do is time and availability. And so if it's there and we know that we can quickly microwave that for 5 minutes, it saves a trip through the drive-through usually for a lot of working families. Here is a sample idea of a week of meals, and then you're going to see links to each of these recipes as well. So thinking back to the plate, so let's kind of round this out a little bit more with the plate and what breakfast would look like, what lunch would look like, how we can make simple choices, but things that aren't just chicken, rice, and vegetables. Because I have a lot of patients who will tell me, well, yeah, I lost weight, but I ate that every single night, and now I'm really tired of eating that. And they're amazed that when I say, well, you could add beef instead of the chicken, or you could have fish, or you could have macaroni and cheese. But if it's whole grain pasta and a little bit lower fat milk in there, and maybe we added some broccoli and chicken, now we have a pretty balanced meal based on that plate. So this is just an example of what that could look like for you for a 3 meal per day type idea. More ideas here, and you're going to have all of these in the slides too. Okay. Here are those outline links of what those were in the recipes. So as we think about what a weekly meal would look like, here's several ideas. You certainly do not have to use these ideas, but they're just simple ideas and suggestions for you. I'm happy to send more if you have questions, concerns about these, or you want to know some healthy substitutes for that. Certainly you can reach out, and I'm happy to help with that too. But these are just merely an idea. For those of you sitting in the room too thinking, well, yeah, Megan, that's great, but I'm one person. I only cook for myself. I live alone, or I only cook for, a family member a few nights a week. Your meals for one are great as well. We can cook a lot and freeze if you want, but if you're not that kind of person and you'd rather just cook regularly, these are all great ideas for that as well, that don't make a whole lot, but would still be healthy for you. So keep that in mind as you're looking through this too. Meals for 2, so we can either scale back a recipe. So for some of you maybe who are used to cooking for families for 10, 20 years, and now it's just you and a spouse, it's like, well, how do I do this? I'm used to cooking for 4 people. These are great ideas that we can scale that back down, or if you're not sure how to do that, start with some of these recipes, and that can help a little bit for breakfast, lunch, and dinner as well. Okay, for families, so a lot of my family members, and then just a lot of community members that I interact with, will talk to me a lot about this picky eater. How do I incorporate this for my family? And as I mentioned, with 2 young kids at home, one that's eating actual food, it's important to think about things that they're willing to eat, but not cater so much to them to where you're compromising your own health and your own nutrition. And that's been a little bit of a struggle for me as a dietitian too, because I want them to eat well, but I don't want to eat mac and cheese every day either. But you can start doing that pretty quickly just to make everyone happy, and then you're compromising your own nutrition. So some tips here to incorporating color: have the child help prepare that meal or plan that meal. Offer the same foods for the whole family. As I mentioned, we don't do a you eat this, I eat this. We're all eating the same thing together. And trying to incorporate some of those favorite things into their meals. Like, for example, my son at home will pretty much eats anything, but lately he's just, I don't want to eat any meat. He won't eat what I put out. But anytime I put fruit out, he could eat cups and cups and cups of fruit. So I'll always put something with fruit out, but that's not all we're going to get. And I continue to offer it until he at least tries it, or we move on to something else. But it's important to put something out there that they do like and that they do enjoy, but mixing it with other foods can be helpful too. So that's really important to do for the family. Lunch and dinner ideas here too. You can see some of these casserole type things, quesadillas. Quesadillas are easy too, because you could make yours with whatever you want, theirs with things that they like. Maybe you add more vegetables to yours, and they keep it with a little bit of a simple vegetable. So easy ideas that we could do there for families. Okay, I want to open it up for questions. We have about 10, 12 minutes or so for questions. So any questions that you have about meal planning, preparation, recipes, or just general nutrition in particular, I'm happy to help answer that. Yes.
We had a question on Zoom from Charlie Lindahl. He asked, what's your take on the various subscription services like HelloFresh? I subscribe to that one.
Okay, so the question was subscription services, HelloFresh, Blue Apron, those types of things. I have nothing against them at all. I think they provide a great benefit for families who need a little bit more of that hand holding. Here's a recipe, here's the ingredients, now prepare it. And they don't want to have to think about it. And I'm right there with you. I mean, by the end of the day, I don't really want to think about everything that we're going to eat for dinner, but I usually have to be that gatekeeper of figuring out what we're going to buy, preparing it, planning it, that type of thing. So with Blue Apron, I think it's great. I think it's an excellent way to get family members in the kitchen with you cooking and preparing. I certainly think it's a better option than getting takeout every night because it helps incorporate the actual preparation of it. So I'm all on board with those for sure. I think it's a great way for us to get ideas even. Maybe you don't do it forever, but you get ideas of how you can put things together and what flavors taste good together if you feel like you're a little much of a beginner in the kitchen and you don't feel as comfortable with that. So great question and a good resource that we could utilize. Other questions? Yes.
What's your take on intermittent fasting?
Yeah, so intermittent fasting, I'll briefly touch on it and we'll talk more on it on the very last I think that's the very last presentation of the series. So intermittent fasting, there's, as a dietitian and nutrition professional, we always have to keep up with the latest research and what that's supporting. And so there is some good research on it. I'm not going to say that, oh, it's just a fad and we just need to blow it off. There's a lot of good research behind it, but I look at it even too from the medical side of where I see a lot of my patients failing with it is they don't eat all day and then they're eating a ton at one time. And so then they're eating a ton at one time. And what does that do for blood sugar? Well, we're not really sure on that yet. We could say that, yeah, it helps manage that a little bit. But from my background and my education, I would say, no, it doesn't. It provides that, okay, nothing, now a huge amount of food. Whether it's healthy or not, it's still a large amount that we have to process. Where I see it beneficial for some of my patients is helping them put cutoffs on when they're eating. Because I have a lot of students, as you may know, that it may be 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning they're eating, and then the next day it's 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., not middle of the night. So the irregular eating patterns, the intermittent fasting helps to give them a little bit more guidance of here's some time window of when to eat. But I work with a lot of eating disorder patients too, so my mind goes there as far as the restrict binge cycle. And that's often, it can lead to that. I've seen eating disorders develop from a type of pattern like that. So I don't recommend it a lot. I recommend really eating regularly throughout the day, getting our calorie needs in when we're up and about, most often early and mid to late day, and trying not to set too hard and fast rigidity to it. I also look at too, with any type of diet approach, is this a long-term plan? So can we do this the rest of our life? What if we're having to take a client out for dinner? What if our son is playing baseball tonight and we say, well, we can't eat? What kind of rules and what kind of education are we giving our kids and family members with that? So I look at it from many different avenues. I think some people can benefit from it, but overall, it is a diet and it is a trend that usually doesn't last very long in most people. Yes.
So what's your advice for getting into a habit of meal planning and thinking ahead? How can we incorporate things in a way that makes it sustainable? I mean, if we drop everything and try to do something completely different.
Yes. So how do we make this more sustainable, meal planning? I think that's an excellent question, because some of you here may be going, yeah, this is basic for me. I do this all the time. And then others are like, okay, this is a lot more challenging. And it sounds great in theory, but then when I try to do it, it doesn't work. So I would say first and foremost, start small. So start with one simple thing. Maybe it's prepping breakfast for the week on Sunday. Okay. Maybe it's, I'm going to subscribe to Blue Apron because that's easy for me. Maybe it's, I'm going to try to cook one meal per week. And so start small. The biggest thing that I see in a lot of consumers and a lot of my patients here again is they want to do it all at once very quickly. And so they're motivated to, I'm going to prepare this, plan this, I'm going to have every night of the week planned. And they do it for a week or 2 days, and then it's overwhelming and it's too much. So start small. Start with something that's manageable, something you feel comfortable with, but also something that makes you feel good too. And so even if that's one meal per week, even if that's 5 days of dinner of at least a plan, and maybe you did it twice that week and you failed 3 other times, it's okay. But trying to figure out what's going to work best for you. I'll tell you as a dietitian, I don't have every single night of the week planned out. It may be kind of okay, on a whim, this is what it is. But if we can utilize some of those resources with at least, here's some staple goods I know I can put together on a weeknight. It may not be the most healthy meal, but I know it's something that I can eat. Great. And then try to fill in those gaps as you go throughout. I will say too, there's going to be seasons of your life or periods of your life where it's not as easy. You may be in school. You may be having kids in school. You may have an illness in the family. And so there's times where it's not always going to work, but don't give up. Don't let that be well, forget it, I can't do this. Try to find those times too to say, all right, it's takeout every night this week, but I know I can add the fruit and vegetable from what's at home. And those are even successes in my mind of how we can do that. Yes, ma'am.
Just real quickly to add to that, I too get overwhelmed whenever I'm looking at the task of prepping meals. So I find breaking that whole thing up into chunks is a little easier. So one night I may be looking at the meals to decide what I'm going to choose. The next night I may be putting together the grocery list. Over the weekend I actually do the shopping and some of the prepping. So that tends to help me a little bit not get so overwhelmed with everything.
Absolutely. And for those listening online, she mentioned just taking each one night a week to do some different things. So prepping the list one night, organizing it the next, going to the store the next. And so it's just those little pieces. I think of it too, even just our daily task of doing laundry or cleaning the house. If we waited to do it one time per month, it would be overwhelming. But if we can space it out a little bit, it helps a whole lot. So I think that's an excellent point that you bring up. It doesn't have to be challenging and it doesn't have to be something that's overwhelming, but it can easily become overwhelming if we try to bite off too much and try to overload ourselves too. Because many of you here have more to do than just plan a meal. You have a lot of other responsibilities. So we have to take that into consideration with this. Thanks for your comment too.
Can I add
Yes.
something? Okay. Early last year, I changed my diet. How I grew up, I don't mind cooking. I love cooking. I watch my mom cooking, spending hours of cooking. But it was more of the flavor that was my interest on the meal. So I changed my diet when I had a new job. I was busy. I would wake up, just go fast food, have coffee, just fast food, come home, fast food. I don't know if that had, I'm sure it took a part of the change in my body, but eventually I was diagnosed with cancer. So I'm a cancer survivor, but this is very important. Yes, it can be boring. It can be, takes too much of the time, but trying to get emotional. But anyway, when I went through chemotherapy, they checked my blood work, and that's when it dawned on me how my potassium was, my sodium was. So I went back to cooking again. I said, okay, I'm not going to rely on medicine. I'm going to change my diet how it was. So, and that caused a big change. I didn't have to go back for potassium pills. I didn't have to take medication to control my sodium. So it is a big benefit. So that's all I wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that's a great, one of our participants shared just her journey with eating healthy. And I think that's awesome that you were able to relate that with taking the time. And I have a little quote on my computer that says, those who don't find time to invest in themselves nutritionally, health-wise, will sooner or later have to find time for illness. And it's the truth, because food is medicine. And so if we don't take that time to at least evaluate our own selves, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be healthy every single day, but we've got to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and our families and our friends and our people that are close to us, because food is really a big part of that. And we'll see that as each presentation goes on too, how much it's important to think about. But in a society where fast food is simple and easy and quick and everything's at our fingertips, it's easy to get into that trap. You mentioned that, grab and go on the way to work, we're busy. We can justify it many different ways, but it's until we have a health scare or until a family member does, or until we really sit back and go, gosh, I've gained 10 pounds this year. It doesn't hit us. So food is really important to take a look at, but hopefully after today, you've seen it doesn't have to be challenging, and it can just start with small pieces here.
And we have a new rule with our family. When we go out to eat, we have to, like you said, add more vegetables in our plate. Yes, you can have your this and that, but make sure you have vegetables.
Yep. And that's one of the most underutilized foods, fruits and vegetables right now. We see it in kids. I see it a lot on campus. I mean, just even look at dining on campus. The choices that some of these students have, it's pizza with chips or sandwich with fries. There's not even an option usually for it. So getting more options or packing those with you or taking them along or having them available at home is really important. Other questions? Yes, saves a lot of money. I had one patient one time who was eating out, I think 2 or 3 times a day. And so I had them save all of their receipts in a spreadsheet. I made them write down every single expense that they had. And then we looked at it after 2 weeks and they were overwhelmed with how much it really cost. And then they started going to the grocery store, and the savings that they had was remarkable. So even just putting some of this down on paper, you kind of mentioned, what are my goals or what am I looking at? Maybe it's a small goal of eating out only 1 time a week instead of 4 times a week. Put that as a goal. Look at it every day. Keep it on your computer. Keep it in your wallet. Keep it on your dashboard of the car. Those are just easy reminders to help us make better choices if you feel like you're in a pattern right now that isn't very healthy. And it's okay to start anywhere you are. It's just a matter of progressing forward from there. So those are all great points. Thanks for sharing your story too. All right, yes.
Are there any general rules of thumb on the freezing? Because you talked about like meal prep and freezing, but I have no idea how long it'll last and still be decent.
Yep. So the question was freezing and like shelf life with that preservation. Different things are going to be a little different. Certainly what I would say is if you like to freeze a lot, invest in a vacuum sealer. It's going to be much better for meats and those types of things. Especially if you buy raw meat in bulk, you can freeze it in individual portions. Say you live alone or with 1 or 2 people. So we have one of those, and I would say that's a really good investment for that type of thing. For dishes that are more you made ahead and froze, I would say certainly an airtight container is best. So a freezer type Ziploc bag instead of just the storage bags. Maybe it's that you lined it's like a foil container, but we put foil on the outside, then we put it in a Ziploc bag on top of that. So we're really keeping that moisture out. That's really where we see the little ice forming and that type of thing that sometimes can change the flavor. Another thing that I would suggest too is, say the dish has cheese on top of it, don't use it and then put it on at the end before you put it back in the oven to where it gives a little bit of that sense of freshness too. The length of how long it'll stay in there, you could probably eat it up to a year and it would probably, food safety wise, be fine. Taste wise may not taste as good. So I would say 1 to 3 months would probably be best on that. But you're not going to hurt yourself if it's longer than that.
Can I say something?
Yes.
When you prepare a regular meal for 2 or 3 days, you don't need to put it in the freezer. So it will last at least a week without a problem.
Right.
But if it has like tomato, fresh tomato or something, then you have to be very careful with that.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, you can have pasta, rice, vegetables, meats, anything for 7 days in a row, just stay in the regular.
Yeah, and there's a great app called Is My Food Safe? And that's a great little food safety. Okay, how do I check on this? Because some people are really afraid of that and they don't want to make themselves sick. And that's a big reason why some people don't cook is because they don't know how to store it, or am I cooking this long enough? And those are just simple techniques that with practice you get better with. But that app is helpful for that too. Yes.
I found investment in a instant read thermometer
Uh-huh.
or some sort of thermometer.
Absolutely.
Like if you're cooking chicken, you make sure you cook it to 170 or 160, whatever the thermometer says. And then you don't have that question. Am I cooking enough? Am I going to poison my whole family or
Right.
whatever? Even baking, I like to put the thermometer in the oven because I have one that has this like wire coming out, and then it beeps at me when it's ready.
Mm-hmm.
So I use the time that they tell me as a guide, but I know exactly what the temperature
Yes,
is.
and that's a great point. She mentioned like an instant read thermometer or digital thermometer even too. Excellent for that because, you know, recipe may say chicken breast, yours may be this thick, theirs may be this thick. So 10 minutes for them, you may need 30 minutes. So it is a little bit different on those instances. So that's an excellent tool that you can always keep in your kitchen as a safety measure. It's a hard and fast, it's done or it's not looking at it and wondering. So great. Okay.
Thank you
You're
so much.
welcome.
If you guys have additional questions for Megan, she might be
Yeah.
a few moments afterwards. But I did want to close out and give you a big round of applause.
Thank
for being
you.
here.